There are many things about our world that are different right now.
The way we work,
the way we live,
and why we give.
One thing remains the same.
What we do together today
determines how we live united tomorrow.
The way Central Ohio rallied this year to help others is proof. Thanks to our generous donors, our Community Response Fund quickly reached more than $2 million.
It helps support more than 70 local not-for-profits and thousands of our neighbors in need.
But as this crisis continues, there's so much work to do.
It's the tough work.
The work that'll be needed to provide relief.
So our community can begin to recover and rebuild.
It's the very work that the United Way of Central Ohio does every day.
And has been doing for nearly 100 years.
We feed people facing food insecurity.
We connect people in crisis to resources that help pay bills and keep them in their homes.
We help prepare children for success in school, work, and life.
In a year that's been hard for many,
you can make a difference.
Give today to help people facing challenges with basic needs and education.
Give today to provide families relief and hope.
Give today to United Way's Community Response Fund.
Because what we do together today,
together today
determines how we live united.
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 United tomorrow.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to United Way of Central Ohio's Rally for Recovery. I'm Ryan Edwards from the Community Impact Team at United Way of Central Ohio. Thank you for joining this panel today as we explore where we are locally with educating our kids safely and effectively, how supports from youth service providers have had to adjust and adapt in the time of COVID-19, and how demands for racial equity and anti-racist approaches are being discussed and operationalized in spaces where our kids are spending their time. Before I introduce our panel, I want to remind everyone that since March, United Way of Central Ohio has focused our efforts on COVID-19 relief through our COVID-19 Community Response Fund. Through the fund, we've been able to quickly raise and distribute nearly $2 million to local nonprofits working to provide relief to people disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And thanks to all of you, a special thanks to everybody who's contributed to that effort. Moving forward, as this crisis persists, we'll continue to focus our efforts on providing support for both COVID-19 short-term relief and the long-term recovery of our community. In this conversation today and the many others that we're hosting this week represent our kickstart to the Rally for Recovery campaign. So thanks again to everybody for joining and for your willingness to support this important work. All right, so let's get into the conversation. I know that's what you're here for. As many of you all know so well, education in 2020 looks different for families across Franklin County and beyond. Balancing work and school schedules, staying up on home and community responsibilities, and making space for ourselves has required juggling, adaptability, and sacrifice that most of us have not experienced before. What we also know is that this global pandemic is disproportionately impacting Black and under-resourced communities more than others. I'm really excited to be joined today by some of our community's leading voices in local education, student supports, and racial equity as we unpack some of this. So I'll briefly introduce our esteemed panel and jump straight into questions so that you can hear from them. Today, I'm joined by Carol Beckerly, board member for the Board of Education for Columbus City Schools. Hello, Carol. Tasha Booker, executive director for City Year Columbus. Hi, Tasha. Kyle Strickland, senior legal analyst for the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. Hey, Kyle. And Noel Britt, School Family Community Coordinator for the One Linden School Initiative. So I'm just going to dive right into it, everybody. And I'm going to start with Carol. Carol, please do feel free to share more about yourself. And we'd love it if you catch us up on where Columbus City Schools is regarding to the start of school, and what are some of the challenges that have been presented, and how's Columbus City Schools and the community responding?
Well, thanks, Ryan, for this opportunity to be part of this panel, and thanks to United Way. It's an honor to be here, and it's really important to continue this discussion, so I'm very happy to be a part of it. briefly about me, I'm a newly minted board member for Columbus City Schools. I taught in the district for 13 years, special education. And prior to that, I practiced law. So I have a very unorthodox background, but I'm right where I'm supposed to be in the middle of this craziness. Columbus City Schools is doing well. Our theme to return has been Rise Up, and there have been ample inspiring examples of us doing just that. Teachers helping teachers learn how to Zoom over the Labor Day weekend, all kinds of creative ways of engaging. A former colleague of mine, I think she wears a different crazy outfit every morning to math class to to get the kids to log in so they can see what she's wearing. And it seems to be working. Just lots of really inspiring stories. And actually one of my favorite, because it also exemplifies the power of the technology when we can really figure out how to harness it. One teacher responded to a parent asking questions about how to navigate a platform with a video of her talking through how to navigate the platform. Like she said, this is an unorthodox way to respond to your email, but it's much more efficient, and it was. Overall, it's been really exciting, but as you would expect with any large urban district where there have been pitfalls, we have the connectivity problems with platforms not working, problems with training parents. We have the challenges of a large ESL population, which adds another whole level of barriers and challenges to making sure everybody's on the same page. But as Dr. Dixon and Jennifer Adair, our board presidents, say, we're getting better every day.
Thank you, Carol.
Well, and actually the other thing I would say, lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities.
Absolutely. And I want to move over to Tasha and Noelle. As mentioned, Tasha leads City Year Columbus, and Noelle's working directly with the One Linden Schools initiative in the Linden neighborhood. And both of you have programming and work that's happening closer to the ground, serving kids directly. I'm hoping that you might share a little bit more about yourselves, your interest, and maybe a little bit of background on you, but also, talk about some of the work that each of your bodies of work are involved with, and then how you've had to respond to COVID and some changes that have taken place as we've moved into this new environment.
Yeah, I'll get us started. So I am the School Family Community Coordinator at the wonderful Windsor STEM Academy. So my work centers on positioning schools as the hubs for neighborhood transformation. We do that by maximizing school and community resources, and ultimately doing that will help optimize student learning and development. Do that through a variety of ways. The biggest thing is just assessing needs at a variety of levels. So every spring we do a school experience survey. So we assess student needs, teacher staff needs, as well as parent caregiver needs. And we take that and hone in on a list of a few priorities that then become my role to help manage, but also work alongside with our school staff, our community partners, to get those things done. So of course, when schools closed, things changed a little bit, right? So our work really pivoted to focusing on basic needs. So making sure first and foremost that our students and families were okay. And so what that looked like initially was working with our amazing community partners, City Year being one of them. Their impact manager and core members were critical in making sure we contacted every single one of our students who had not logged on. So they were key in making that happen. Then for us, just shifting to, kind of food support. So we were able to get a site up and running at Rosewind, which is the apartment complex near our school. Gave out about 5,500 meals just at that one site. And so that was a collaboration between Rock City, Columbus Children's Hunger Alliance, and then Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. And so again, we just really shifted towards, I don't want to talk too much about like the virtual programming yet, but that was first priority during that first half of what we were doing, just making sure folks were all right.
Thank you,
Sasha,
Ryan.
Sasha, same for you. Why don't you share with us a little bit about City Year and how you all have adjusted?
Thank you, Ryan. I am Tasha Booker. Thank you for the invitation. I'm the executive director for City Year Columbus. I am starting my 7th city year, our 7th school year, but I am most proud of being a Columbus City School graduate myself by way of Fort Hayes, and my home school was Mifflin High School. So I just want to pay homage to the district that we all are here to talk about and are supporting. So City Year nationally in a typical school year would be serving about 200,000 students across 350 public and urban schools in 29 cities. We have about 3,000 AmeriCorps members who are serving as student success coaches throughout the nation, and working to strengthen academic and social emotional skills of our students, helping students develop skills like teamwork, time management, a developmental mindset, a growth mindset, and to help achieve their goals and to thrive. Locally, as Noel shared, we are serving in the Windsor Elementary School and LMSA, which is 2 of our 7 schools. So our 62 AmeriCorps members in a typical year would be physically serving all day, 5 days a week, a little over 45 to 50 hours a week in schools, South High School, Livingston Elementary School, Trevitt, Champion, Lyndon McKinley STEM Academy, Mifflin, and Windsor. And Noel, as part of the One Linden Project, is also a member of the Windsor Youth Collaborative that is supported by the Partnership for Success. So we're really proud of that partnership. Typically, on a day-to-day, our core members tutor students one-on-one, in small groups. We're helping our teachers keep our students focused in class. We're organizing school-wide events and running after-school programs. And as we're doing this panel virtually, we know that this is not a typical school year. But this spring, we were able to pivot to provide most of those services virtually. So in the spring, as schools close, we work closely with all of our 7 school partners, with their principals and teachers, to identify what the supports the students were going to need, and also as the teachers were transitioning as well, what their needs were going to be and how we could start to fill in those gaps. We've been, in those 7 schools since the start of school. So when school opened September 8th, City Year was logged on and ready to support our students and welcome them back with a lot of our, virtual clap-ins. Everyone loves the cheering in of the teachers and the students, and we were there to do that. So we've been supporting about 50 classrooms virtually since September 8th. We've made hundreds of attendance calls, but not only attendance calls, positive phone calls home, right? So it's not just enough to kind of track down students and families. We also want to encourage our students and encourage our families, when their students are really leaned into the virtual space, because this is different, for all of us.
Thank you, Noel and Tasha. Appreciate you sharing kind of how the experience has gone so far. We know we're only a couple weeks in at Columbus City Schools, and what I've heard from you all already is sort of partnerships and collaborations and working together and learning together has really been a part of our collective experience together. Is a lot of this is new to us, to administrators, schools, support staff. All of us are sort of learning together and maybe finding new opportunities to work together. So appreciate you sharing with us that with us. Kyle, do want to loop you into the conversation here. Kyle, you wear many hats, which include having necessary conversations with a wide variety of stakeholders around anti-racism and implicit bias. You also lead a statewide effort aimed at improving outcomes for young men and boys of color through the Ohio My Brother's Keeper initiative. These things that you're working on, the conversations that you're having, are very important to society at large, but particularly important for education of our young folks. So as you're having conversations, there's 2 things. What are you seeing in your work? And how are these issues coming together in schools and other spaces where young people are spending their time?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. Thank you to United Way for being here. And then, of course, with Tasha, Noel, and Carol, I'm grateful to be on this panel with you. So, there's a couple of things that I think really stand out the moment that we're in, is really being clear that where we're at right now, this is not normal. And any attempts to normalize this moment is an attempt to deal with some of the anxiety, the uncertainty around this. But we also do have to make sure that we have the time to take a moment to recognize that this isn't normal. And any attempts to believe that it is normal is just going to miss the mark. And the facts are this: we have to have tough, hard conversations about what recovery actually looks like. Because when we know in the other aspects of recovery, when it comes to an economic recession, when it comes to any sort of barriers that we see, even when it comes to natural disasters, all sorts of things, what we find and what the research shows is that after the recovery process, you actually see, in many cases, inequality widen. And we've already seen, with the disparities of COVID-19 disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities, we know that you're going to see these disparities continue to be exacerbated, whether it comes to access to quality care, access to food, access to the resources and educational opportunities, and then, of course, even access to internet. All these things have been exacerbating disparities. And so it's important for us to recognize that while we're in this moment right now, we also have to know that this moment that we're in, it wasn't normal before either. We've accepted the inequality, the despair that people have faced, and we have seen it as, well, that's just kind of the status quo. That's the way it is. And what we've recognized, and I hope in this moment people can realize that as we move forward in addressing these issues, we have to see that these disparities are not okay. And what a lot of the work that I do with My Brother's Keeper across the state, but also conversations about race, is this: we see the inequality, the despair, the poverty that people are in, and we see that as a structural problem. We see that as the exploitation, the barriers, the systemic factors, including things like systemic racism, that have marginalized communities and have left them behind. There are those that want to have a narrative that says that the issues that you're in, that is the fault of your own. That is some sort of individual deficit, some sort of group flaw or cultural deficit, all of that. And we see that play out through our education system. We see that play out through our economy. All of these issues, it's a narrative of blame and personal responsibility. And that's where I think we see all of us as community partners are really just trying to fill in the gaps. We're really trying to do what we can to provide the supports that we need. But as we do that necessary critical work, we also have to recognize that without addressing these deeper structural problems, we will continue to be patching every step of the way. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this conversation. And I think one of the things that we all can do is ensure that if you're really committed to this work, and more so than just putting out a value statement or a statement against anti-racism, we have to see what that looks like in practice. It's easy for us to say we believe in racial equity in the abstract. It's much harder when we actually talk about our own policies, our own practices, and our norms that we move forward on. So we've been doing that all across the state, having a lot of conversations, but of course, working on the ground too with students to making sure that they're getting connected to the resources that they need. But we're also figuring out what we can do at the federal, state, and local level to advocate for the support systems and structures for our families and communities.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. I really appreciate you and your perspectives on these things. You're a local leader relative to these issues, and really appreciate you being here. What you say kind of reminds me of some of the conversations that Carol and I have had in the past, and that's the reality that pre-COVID times, and in pre-COVID times, education as construction was not working for many kids and families. And as we've talked about, before, the goal beyond COVID isn't just to get back to normal, but to get education to a place that works for all students and families. And so, Carol, I'll start with you, but I would really love to hear from the entire panel. What are some of the opportunities that our current time is presenting that might help us to accelerate movement towards that more desirable state where there is greater equity for all of our students?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything Kyle said. And there's two things that stand out as what was not okay before that are particularly both, I think it's kind of an interesting interplay, highlighting the challenges, but also maybe providing some opportunity. And so the first thing I want to point out is that the decision about whether to hold in-person school, whether to hold graduation last spring, all of these things are colored in a large urban district such as ours because the infection rates are different. And so the decision for us is very different when we're looking at so many of our zip codes with double and even triple the rate of infection of surrounding neighborhoods. So that's a disparity that existed before and is just being highlighted by COVID. But it also cautions us to, it places a larger burden on us in terms of our decision-making about whether to go back, which in some senses might be also an opportunity. And I'll put a pin in that for a second to go to my second point. And the second point is, because of the pandemic, we have made the leap, the decision, the commitment with the support of the community, with the support of the City Hall, to get Chromebooks in every student's hand. And that is something that quite frankly should have happened 10, 15 years ago, but it's happened now. And it can be a game changer that will change the trajectory of how we can start to narrow some of these equity gaps through education. But it's not going to happen overnight. And it's an art and not a science. And so we've got an entire system that's pivoting from basically the in-person instruction that's not all that different than it was when I went to school. Well, a little different, but I went to school a long time ago. But to this powerful tool, but neither the students nor the teachers really know how to harness that power, that technology. And so getting back to my first point about it's a much more difficult decision for us to go back to school. Given that, and given the need to get everybody up to speed on the higher levels of effectiveness with the technology, that we could use this time to do that well, rather than going back to school, doing hybrid learning, which in my opinion benefits no one because everyone's in a constant state of transition. But, and I say that from a teaching perspective, it's not entirely uninformed. You know, when you have kids switching every 2 days back and forth, everybody's just either winding down or winding up and nobody's settled in. And the same for teachers and the grownups that are doing the same transitioning. But and knowing that our rates are going to fluctuate and that when they fluctuate, it's much more serious. We may make a different decision about whether to go back, which I've been pretty vocal about advocating for and saying, let's be really intentional about this time. I call it looking at COVID through a post-COVID lens. And then I can leave it to Tasha and Noelle to talk about how we might attend to the other needs of our students, because we cannot make that decision in a vacuum. It's not okay to say, okay, no school for 3 quarters or a year, and we're going to get really good at computers and let, everyone's, and eliminate all the other supports that our students need.
Yeah, Carol, thank you, for teeing that up. Kyle started down this path, though, talking about the inequities that Black America, Black Columbus, families and students were experiencing pre-COVID. And even though this pandemic is impacting us all, we know the recovery is going to be longer for communities of color. We've only been in the pandemic for 9 months. It's probably going to take a decade for, Black America to be able to recover. It's continuing to exacerbate the existing systemic inequalities that, permeated throughout our, throughout our communities, but also throughout, the sectors that intersect families. So everything from healthcare to education to housing, Black and brown folks will continue to feel those effects when the rest of America is in the state of recovery. We're already hearing about some states are recovering jobs, most of the jobs that they lost. We know that's not the case when you disaggregate that data for Black and brown families. I'm in the education sector, and a lot of these conversations around recovery have been divorced from how that impacts our students, right? And how it impacts our schools. And we just cannot allow any recovery to happen mutually exclusive from the education sector, not just from from higher ed, right? Where there's a lot of millions, billions of dollars that flow through that sector, but it's K-12, right? That is going to really feel the long-term, impact of, of COVID. Not only COVID, but the civil unrest, right? The trauma and subsequent grief that they're feeling about watching, the death of a human life on television. Our kids are not immune to that. They're all on more so now, they're all on, their phones and laptops all day, every day. And you have to understand that the school is more than academic learning, right? That is where our students and many of our families build their community. So their normalcy of having a community to help process what is happening has been upended, right? And so while some of our other communities can bring in guest speakers or trauma-informed specialists or grief counselors from the day they start school, our students and families don't have that access, right? The school space was that for our students, families, and I would even say our teachers, and they've lost that. And so, care is going to have to be given when we return back to school, whether it's hybrid or when we go all in. We're not going to be able to go back to school as usual and just, get back into a hybrid model, and we don't address the trauma and the grief that our students in our school community is actually, feeling. We're going to have to rebuild that school community and build the community and build trust. We have to think more than the academics. And I know it's harder to do, right? Because we're a meritocratic society, and looking at grades and achievement scores is how we assess success or failure. What becomes harder to measure is the social emotional impact that our students will be feeling decades from now, really reliving that trauma. And we know, there's plenty of studies, but there's one that was just done throughout COVID over these 9 months by Northwestern University. They took 150,000 Chicago public high school students and found that the more schools focused on social emotional development, they had students with more higher grades, fewer absences, and fewer disciplinary instances. So we're going to really need to address the social emotional needs in order to influence academics.
Noel, do you have anything you'd like to add on to that? I know that you're working closely with kids and families in the Linden neighborhood. Wonder if you might be able to speak a little bit from a family perspective, just sort of what you're seeing, and then, similar question, what opportunities do we have? What are we learning from the time of COVID, our virtual time together, and how can we be even better as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So tying what everyone has so beautifully said, it's one of the opportunities is, like we mentioned, wrapping around the family, right? And so now more than ever, right? Because, our parents and caregivers are co-teaching with our teachers at home, right? And a lot of them have dealt with so much since this pandemic and since the physical closure of schools. So we talked about the technological barriers, right? So not, maybe being super comfortable navigating a Chromebook or Zoom, because how often were we all using Zoom prior to COVID? Not super frequently, right? Even having to catch up to speed for myself, was quite the task. Like we mentioned, like school being, places for food assistance, shelter, parents dealing with loss of income and health disparities. And so what we were able to do in a more targeted approach this summer was with 20 families, 19 families, we had a family with twins, and 20 students from Hamilton and Windsor. Yes, Ryan's got twins, so he's always excited when we talk about the twin girls, was within this 6-week, we did a 6-week virtual summer program that did just that, fully wrapped around the family. And so what we did from the beginning was kind of front load parents with what exactly they needed. We did parent orientations. We came out in a socially distanced and healthy way to get folks set up on their devices, because we were able to support this program through funds from the United Way's Emergency Response Fund. So each of our kiddos got a brand new Chromebook to keep, data hotspots that are being paid for through the school year. We had a range of parents in comfort with technology. So we have a great grandmother who is 83, 84 with 3 young kiddos, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, kindergarten. So we have spent a lot of time with them this summer, just getting them comfortable with that, with what that looked like. So for those kiddos, we provided live sessions for those 6 weeks. Monday through Wednesday, we did academic enrichment sessions. We did an SEL and social skills curriculum called Chalk Talk, which was developed through the Life Sports program through Ohio State. And so we talked about different things like empathy, like goal setting, like persistence, like very many things, you know, being supportive to your peers, even and especially during this time. We also were able to do weekly parent sessions with those grownups. And Tasha, like you were mentioning, for us, it was about building a community. So that small knit group of parents became really close during that time. So it was their time to talk about what was concerning them, what they were worried about, what they needed. We were able to bring in community partners to address some of those needs and get them connected to those resources. And then on Fridays, we were able to go out and do family check-ins, again, socially distanced and safe. And then they also earn prizes during the week, because we know kiddos get super competitive and, you know, like to work towards something. So during that 6 weeks, those students got, you know, really close, because some of them weren't getting live sessions during the school year. Those parents got close, that we became kind of our own little small knit community. And then again, we were able to support them and get them connected to the resources that they really needed. And so thankfully, we're continuing that program through this fall. We're expanding that to kindergarten parents to offer that same support. They'll also get new Chromebooks and data hotspots. We're doing something similar with some 6th grade families. So again, just that opportunity to truly wrap around our families now more than ever.
Thank you all for sharing your experience thus far. It reminds me of this idea of technology, remote learning, virtual learning, the need for a hotspot, the need for a Chromebook. You know, we've kind of talked a little bit about how, you know, those things have been distributed and provided for kids throughout the district. We also know that there is a range of children in the district who have not yet logged on to the virtual environment. And it's something that we've talked about as a community, both from Columbus City Schools, but also as community supporters, community-based organizations, how we can support that group of kids. I think at the last call that I was on with Columbus City Schools, the number was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, was around 6,000 kids, or somewhere around 10% of the population. I may be off on that, but Carol, I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Kids that are not yet logging on, or that we've not heard from yet. And then how, as a community of supporters, how can we potentially plug in and help with that sort of difficult issue?
Sure. I don't have a number. I think it doesn't really matter what the number is, because there's no way it's where it needs to be. And that was to be expected. We're a massive organization is doing a massive shift with a population of many parents who are already not engaged. And I can go on a tangent about that, but I will suffice it to say, for very valid and rational reasons. And it's incumbent upon us to figure out how to get them more engaged. And I guess that's why I assume that our challenge, among all the other challenges, is going to be, we have to have a concerted effort to go out and reach those families. And I'm thrilled with our Office of Engagement, which literally didn't exist a year and a half ago, which is already making great strides in terms of that. But it sort of gets me back to my seeing this all in some ways as an opportunity, because if we focus on the threshold things, which are getting the kids logged in and getting the families engaged, we will be setting ourselves up for success when this is all over, and in a much steeper learning curve, both in terms of literally academics and also in terms of building community and all those other things. And what I've been, and the other thing that, Noelle, the program you described just is amazing. We have to have that everywhere. It's incredible. It's exactly what's needed. And so I also see the opportunity here is if we were to take the getting good at using technology on that challenge and with intentionality and providing lots and lots of training and lots of coaching, and couple that with a real push for engagement and to address the trauma that Tasha was talking about. We're starting to do that in smaller segments with these learning extension centers and the rec center programs. I'm going to get it wrong. Active learning. What are they calling the rec programs? Active
learning and learning extension centers.
Active learning centers, right? And but in my strategic view of the world, or grandiose view of the world, I would like to see the district combining with partners, which is why this sort of rally for recovery is right in my wheelhouse in terms of what I want to see us do. Take that on en masse. And so while we're working on the academic front and the technology front, figure out ways to provide social emotional learning, trauma-informed practice, healthcare, all of these things in our buildings, and maybe in overflow with the rec centers, but make it available to all of our families so that we're addressing the trauma in real time and say, this is hit the pause button here. This year was going to be a back and forth, up and down, hot mess, excuse the technical term, no matter what we did. So why don't we figure out how to set ourselves up on both fronts? Because we could do some of the stuff that Noelle's describing, because we have so many partners in place already, but we need to find the community will to do it, because the schools by themselves aren't going to take on and shouldn't really, given their lane, the whole thing, but we sure do have the place to provide it. And, if we could figure out how to fast track providing those services and starting to bring the families in to the buildings, all within healthy, socially distanced parameters, but intentionally, and using these devices as ways to do that, we could really hit the ground running in 2021 and bust all the records. I have complete confidence, but it has to be our willingness. And I think Tasha hit on it. We're a meritocracy. So it's instinctively, educators especially, become very uncomfortable when you say take the foot off the gas in terms of teach, when in fact taking the foot off the gas in this particular moment and pivoting would probably be the truly inspired way to go. So I think that the opportunity is here if we could figure out how to join forces, because it's happening in pockets really well.
Thank you, Carol. I wonder, Tasha, if you have anything you want to add on to that, and as you do, you mentioned the learning extension centers and the way that the community faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and a lot of United Way partners, like your organization, are kind of coming together to rally around learning extension centers and adjusting some of the work that you do to support those. So wonder if you have anything to kind of add on to what Carol said, and then also would appreciate your thoughts on learning extension centers for folks who may not have heard of those yet.
Thanks, Ryan. So we certainly have all heard of the terminology collective impact, and we've talked a lot about it in theory, right? What the pandemic did for us was then put it into practice, accelerated it, into practice. And that's what you got with the Office of Engagement through Columbus City Schools with the Partnership in Action. There are over, nearly 400 people engaged through the Learning Extension Centers, that some were started through the faith-based community because those churches and centers are situated in communities. They see families, whether they're members of the church or not. They are there, proximate to our students and to our families. And so, the idea of how do we help families who may not have reliable Wi-Fi, who also parents are needing to apply for jobs and may not have a computer or even the understanding of how to navigate applying for jobs online, coming to be a food hub and a safe space, for our students. Again, the schoolhouse is goes beyond, the academic learning. And so these partners got together, and we've been meeting since March, since the day school closed on March 12th. That Monday, which was the 16th, we all were on a call, and they've been, weekly calls on how do we support our students, not just through the pandemic. I mean, we all were in shock. No one knew what was happening to us in March. But then through the summer, we really started thinking about, now we need to plan for post-COVID, as Carol was talking about. My vision, my hope is that we start to think about all of the supports, all of the investments that happened through the pandemic. How do we scale that up? Because my concern for our students in Columbus City Schools and in the larger urban districts is that once we're able to return to some sort of normalcy, because I agree with Kyle, this is not normal. Carol, we justify it. But once we're able to return back to normalcy, will we go back to our individual lives, right? And we will leave those students and our communities behind. And again, that goes back to that, that there's a statement that when white America catches a cold, Black America gets the flu. And it's going to be a long, long time. I would like to see those investments continue. What would it look like that for every third grader, every rising third grader got a laptop, period? I mean, no one's really using books any longer, right? Like school books. All the learning is happening on cell phones and iPads and laptops. Why can't that become part of the school supplies? Why are we as a community okay with our students learning from books that were decades old, with outdated, history and outdated information? Our kids want, relevant curriculum. And that, that's another thing. We have to start bringing in our student voice, to these conversations that gives them, authority and autonomy. We share that power with them. They will tell you. And what we've heard from some of our kids is that, look, a lot of the things we're learning, not just in our urban school districts, but across our communities, isn't relevant to what they think they're going to need in the future. We are living in a gig society. Everything that we can't live without now was created by someone young and impressionable who was thinking futuristically. We have to set our kids up in the same way. So those learning extension centers allows for our students to come in still in a safe way, see a caring adult. Our AmeriCorps members are serving at Douglas Recreation Center, which is in the Rosewind community, and we're serving Windsor students. Again, the Partnership for Success, along with Principal Demond at Windsor, were very intuitive to say, we know our families are going to need support. We went knocking on doors, as Noelle said, getting those parents to letting them know that this resource was available. We have to continue that post-COVID. Carol talked about this. Parents aren't engaged because they just want to be disengaged. All parents, regardless of their economic status, want the best for their kids. We have to provide those supports like their counterparts, have. What does it look like now to have parent-teacher conference on a Zoom? We can't say we don't have the technology to do so, right? We should all be experts by the time this is over. We have to think about how we engage our students, how we support our students differently post-COVID.
I just have a quick thing to add about the engagement, because that's the other piece about this technology that's huge. A huge hurdle is when the parents don't show up, right? And then there's this gap that for whatever reason doesn't get bridged. Now that gap is inherently eliminated, and the potential again for the trajectory in terms of engagement to be very steep as opposed to, incremental is huge.
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective. Kyle, I want to loop you back in here. I see you as our systems guy, so you're going to get the big questions. And I heard you say at the beginning of the conversation, what's important about this moment is how we put these conversations that we're having into practice, right? And so want to just kind of follow up on that a little bit as we're, kind of in this moment, as we're having conversations, we're talking about change. What are the things that we need to be talking about relative to education? How do we not miss the moment that we're in? What are the conversations about equity and race and education from a systems perspective that we need to be having and that we need to capitalize on during this time?
That's a great question, Ryan, and thank you so much. Everybody really summed up a lot of these issues. What I think the through line of this moment that we're in now, it is an accountability moment. Whether it comes to how we decide to recover in this moment due to COVID-19, or how we decide to respond to the countless instances of police violence and brutality, and seeing the deaths of and killings of Black Americans right here in this country, and the systemic racism that persists. And so as part of that, that means we have to have the hard conversations. We have to have the difficult conversations, and we need people to be willing to flip some tables over, basically, in the sense that at the end of the day, we have a lot of discussions, we have a lot of conversations, and then whenever it gets to those uncomfortable topics, we kind of tend to shy away from having those discussions because that ruffles relationships. It hurts the long-term engagements and partnerships. But here's the thing. We have come to the point where in many instances, if you've been able to kind of gain the credibility and experience to be a community leader, you have a little bit of space to have that platform, to have some tough, difficult conversations. However, you only have so much space to have those conversations. After a while, you're not going to get invited back to the tables if you keep shaking the table. However, it is so necessary for us to do that. And here's why. The facts are that we could talk all day and try to do everything in the world about these issues, but if we're not holding each other accountable and the systems, our own institutions, but also the institutions that we work with in a way that is productive and it is conducive, of course, then we are not going to solve these issues. And the reason why I say it's an accountability moment is because it's not something where we can all just band together and try to solve the problem. The fact is that things like racism, things like inequality, things like poverty, it's not as if these things are just happening in a vacuum. There are actual forces at play that are pushing the levers of inequality forward. There are forces at play that make it easier for, if you're super wealthy, to make more money in the midst of a pandemic and make less in the midst for everybody else. There are actual things at play. And so even when we talk about the Rally for Recovery, it is an amazing ability for our communities to respond, to come together, to address these issues. But we also have to know that this is a fight. This is a fight. This is not just us coming together, holding hands, trying to solve problems. We have to fight actors and institutions and systems that are causing these problems and continuing to cause these problems. We can't not talk about these issues without leaning in to issues of anti-racism. And the notion that talking about anti-racism and our history and legacy of slavery and racism and discrimination, there are those who are trying to say that that's anti-American. It is not anti-American to talk about our history. We have to stop paving over our history, because when we pave over our history, we pave over the lived experiences of so many people. And it ties into every single thing that we do. And Carol brought up a great point. When it comes to parent engagement, community engagement, too often we put the burden on the families and the communities and not enough on other systems at play. The facts are this: we can try to do everything that we can in Columbus City schools. We can try to do everything we can within our institutions. But at the end of the day, if we're not giving people a living wage, if we're not providing them healthcare and opportunities to thrive in our society, then what are we doing? What we are doing is saying that we believe in these issues, and then, on the other hand, behind the scenes, doing things that are keeping the status quo alive. And so I think it's so important for us to call it out, to call out these forces. And that's this accountability moment. I think more than ever, people are willing to say, let's lean into issues of anti-racism. Let's talk about these issues. Let's talk about equity. This isn't a political thing. This is about human rights. This is about basic decency. This is about moving us forward. And so I'm grateful to be on a panel like this, because I know we have leaders who are willing to lean in and talk about these issues and have done that. But it's also important for those who are on the sidelines to help continue to support them in those efforts, because those hard conversations, that requires doing new things, and people don't have patience oftentimes to see these new things through, but we need to do that, and we need to support that effort. And so I know more than ever, we've got to talk about anti-racism. It's good to see, especially we've got partnerships with United Way and others around racial equity partnership and really bring this out to the health and human services. Well, we got to talk about the business community and some of the practices that they're doing that are actually expanding some of these inequalities. And so how do we actually address some of this in a way that is helpful for our long-term recovery? We have to be hold each other accountable in this moment.
All right, Kyle's got us fired up. We're ready to go, right? No, I think it's thank you so much for that. I think it's a perfect segue into sort of the next question. You know, this, and you mentioned it, this week around rallying for recovery. You know, through this campaign, we're asking folks to rally around kids, families, and organizations as we weather through COVID fallout, calls for racial equity, racial justice. And so, you know, how could United Way supporters rally around this work? You know, Kyle, you've issued what amounts to a call to action, right? You know, it's something to say words, but it's actually meaningful if we're moving into action together. So for anybody who's watching this, United Way supporters, what are some of the things that you would say to the community about how they can contribute to the work that we're talking about today? And that's a question for all of you.
You know, if there are leaders running business units, running organizations, your budgets, your investments, those are your moral documents, right? And so thinking about when you are doing your annual giving as a company and you're setting your philanthropic pillars, that you're understanding what you're investing in, that you're engaged, that you're not just throwing, money at the problem. The nonprofit community, we certainly need your financial investments, but we also need people to lock arms with not only our agencies, but with our students, with our schools, understand how school funding works, right? Hold forums. We're happy as agency, and organizations to come to, one of your virtual meetings, in this space, but on a physical meeting and talk about and help you get proximate to some of the challenges our community, is facing. But just making sure that you're investing, wide and deep. I know that, there's, everyone is at different capacity to give, every organization, every individual, but it's not enough just to throw money at the problem. I really hope that this pandemic, we're not just watching from our television what's happening to the rest of America, that we become more proximate leaders, whether you're the leader, the function leader, or your staff, that you become more proximate to the, to the community. It's your community, whether you live here or not, and it impacts us all.
I have a more nuts and bolts approach to that in terms, absolutely what Tasha said is 100% true, but a really targeted, what can we do response. I think that if there was ever a time for the community to come together, the business community, our partnerships, our social service agencies, and to say to Columbus City Schools, we want to do this thing, which is make the school the hub. We want to do it in this time, and we want to give you, as a community, we're not going to hold you accountable for, teaching to the test or opening just because everybody else around us is opening. We're going to say, figure out the technology well and let us come up with a program that will attend to the social emotional needs while using your buildings and maybe using extra buildings, and take this moment and say, we're going to instill our kids with, we'll take care of that. And say to Columbus City Schools, and please, allow us to work, allow us to collaborate with your social workers and your counselors and your nurses and your psychologists, so that we can create a team of doing this, so that when we return, this will all be second nature to us. The social emotional learning, the trauma informed practices, the restorative justice, healthcare in the schools, and then even do some of the stuff that Noelle was talking about, and Tasha as well, and even Kyle, about tending to the parents' needs. And let us use this opportunity, this crazy time we're in, to make the schools the hubs they need to be. And we'll work with you, because I think we all do this. Well, the schools need to take the lead. Well, the agencies need to take the lead. And United Way, could lead the rally. It's a rally. And I see that opportunity exists, and I would do my level best, everything in my power, to promote it if we could make it happen, because I think that will change things.
Well, I know we could continue having this conversation, and we will. We'll continue having this conversation. I think to all of the points that have been made here, we need to move beyond conversation and be committed to action, and what we do in practice matters. And so thank you for the conversation today. Do want to thank everybody who has tuned in for tuning in. As we've heard and we all know, the times that we're living through right now are requiring all of us to adapt and adjust. And what so many of us have become acutely aware of is how very important our educators, student support providers are, certainly to kids, but also to our families, our economy, our workforce, and ultimately the future of the community that we live in. And so I do want to extend a big round of thanks to our panelists for helping to shine a light on what life is like for families that we're all working with. Thank you for all that you do on behalf of kids and families in this community. We're so lucky here at United Way to have these relationships. This is, we've built great relationships with all of you over time, and we're so fortunate to be in league with great change makers like yourselves. Also, to all of you who are watching, thank you for your support. Thank you for your time. We're hopeful that this hour has been meaningful to you and has inspired you to get behind and support partners like these in our collective efforts to get through COVID, to move forward into a more racially just and equitable education environment where education works for all of our kids. This community needs you, your time, as was mentioned, your time, your talents, your treasures, to make sure that those who need support the most are getting it. Please do stay plugged into our Rally for Recovery throughout the week. We'll be having more panels like this now through Friday, highlighting the great work that's happening throughout the United Way network. You can find those opportunities at liveunited.centralohio.org. And remember, the theme that we're carrying through the week is what we do together today determines what we do united tomorrow. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.